Well, welcome to our cut flower gardening advanced training. I'm Lynn Wild, the Vice President Program Chair of our Wyandotte County Master Gardeners. And Karen Pendleton will talk about how to start the plants growing, harvest, and post-harvest handling of cut flowers. And it's my privilege to introduce Karen. We've known each other for a few years. I bought plants from her at the Pendleton's Country Market. And Karen was one of the first cut flower growers in the area around Lawrence, Kansas. Karen began growing flowers 30 years ago on the Pendleton farm. Today, the farm produces more than 100 varieties over 3 acres. The flowers are taken to the Lawrence's Farmers Market every Saturday throughout the summer. Karen and her talented staff create cut flower arrangements through her custom floral business for weddings, parties, and events. Karen, take it away.
Some basic information about there. Like you already said, I'm just outside of Lawrence, Kansas. We started, just to give you a little bit more information, we started 40 years ago by planting our first ½ acre of asparagus. We now have, we've had up to 20 acres of asparagus. Before that, we had a cattle feed lot and raised corn, soybeans, and we were regular Kansas farmers. But then in the early 80s, we put in some asparagus to kind of be as an alternative crop because of the farm crisis. And from then, it has been off to the races in horticultural crops. We also raise hydroponic tomatoes in our greenhouse. We usually start harvesting the second week of May in there, and we harvest tomatoes out of there till, actually this year it was the end of September. We use all biological controls in our greenhouses, so we haven't sprayed anything in any of the greenhouses for about 30 years. We also do pick your own. We do a lot of vegetables. That's kind of how we started, was with vegetables. We do pick your own on a number of different crops that are easy to harvest. And then we sell those, as he said, at the Lawrence Farmers Market. And then we also sell our flowers at the farmers market. Most of our flowers we do in bouquets. On Friday afternoons, all the gals get together, and the guys, I shouldn't say gals, they get together and we make up bouquets. We'll sell between 200 and 300 bouquets a week. That is what we've been doing the last few years. I have to admit that in 2008, when the economy crashed, we went from 200 bouquets a week to about 30 bouquets a week. So it seems like the flower business kind of goes with the economy, and it's the first thing that people kind of cut back on. But so far it's been pretty good the last few years. We first started doing dried flowers because when I started growing flowers, it was in the mid 80s, and dried flowers were all the rage. And so we started doing lots and lots of dried flowers. We continue to do dried flowers, but the favor of dried flowers really kind of died after 2000, and it just really wasn't much of a market there. But in the last 2 years, it's really come back again. So that might be something that people are looking at. We started doing fresh flowers in about 1991. We found that it was so much easier to sell the fresh flowers, and people would actually pay more for fresh flowers than they would for dried flowers. And that's kind of odd, or it's counterintuitive, because the dried flowers have a lot more work into them because you have to be drying them and storing them. But the fresh flowers became much bigger for us in 1991. We do flowers for special events. These are some pictures of flowers at the Symphony in the Flint Hills. We've done the flowers out there for a number of years. The theme this particular year was waterways in the Flint Hills. And so I was out picking cattails in our wetlands area. We do lots of wedding and event things. Keeps us really busy. This business was very good until 2 years ago when COVID hit. We went from 2 to 3 weddings every weekend to about 6 weddings for the entire year. So here again, things change, and you kind of have to go with what's given to you. So I'm going to start out here first. I'm just going to start off with tips for longer vase life before I get into flowers, just because this is the most important thing you need to know. Do harvest in the cool of the day, and if possible, harvest your flowers the day before you want them arranged. I have a lot of people who want to come out, get their flowers the day they're picked. That really isn't a good idea because they haven't bulked up with water. We need to have them go through the process of filling with water. I like to put them in the cooler, make sure that they're full of water and ready to go. And also we pick early morning. Sometimes we'll pick late in the day if we didn't get everything done in the morning, but we try and do everything by 11 o'clock in the morning when cutting flowers. When harvesting, use clean, cool tools and clean buckets. Be sure to wash off your knives or clippers, and clean buckets. I do sell to a few florists, and it's amazing the buckets they'll bring out. They might disinfect them, but they never clean them, it seems like. So clean buckets. One of the major jobs on the farm is washing buckets every day. You want to check your water. Acidic water or a low pH water will take up the water best in the flowers. Hard water has to be softened, but the salts can be a problem. We have to go through a water softener since we're on a well, but it doesn't seem to be too much of a problem. And then I've heard that fluoride is toxic to most bulb crop flowers. Here again, I don't have fluoride in my well water, so that's just something that I've always been told. When harvesting, take any foliage that will be below the water level off. This is one of the hardest things for me to get across to new employees, people who are harvesting for me. Any of that foliage that's below the water will start to go bad, and you get slimy in the water, and you just want to get all of that off. And when making bouquets, you're going to possibly take more greenery or foliage off of that flower when you're putting in a bouquet. Anything that's underwater, you want taken off. Do use floral preservatives. I have a lot of people who don't want to put chemicals in their flowers, and they have come up with all these home remedies, and that is quite fine, and most of them will probably get you by, but it's just easier to go buy some Floral Life, or there's different names for them, the little packets of powder that will help your flowers last longer. There's a pH adjuster in there. There's a biocide. There's sucrose, which is a food source for them. And there's also a wetting agent that will take the water up faster by the flower. So today I'm going to talk about a few flowers, not hundreds of flowers, because there's so many to choose from, but I'm going to put them into 4 groups so that we can kind of keep things straight. Focal flowers, filler flowers, line flowers, and greenery is kind of how I'm dividing this up. The focal flowers draw the eye. They're always the biggest flowers usually. The line flowers add height. And here in this picture, you can see the delphinium there. That's really adding some interest in the height. The filler flowers will fill in any gaps. They're usually your lower cost flowers also. And then greenery, of course, supports the entire bouquet. Lately, there's been a trend to get away from a lot of greenery. It's either a lot of greenery or no greenery, it seems like. But that's something that is actually hard for us here in Kansas sometimes to find, is greenery, because during the summer, the insect pressure, the grasshoppers, that sort of thing, to find greenery that doesn't have some sort of bug bite in it is always difficult. But so that's my biggest challenge, is the greenery, but I always like to have something in the bouquet to kind of hold it together. Here's an example of focal flowers. The arrows, there's a dahlia up at the top there. That's really going to be showy. The Lizzie Antonys, of course, is always showy. Lizzie Antonys is an annual flower that looks much like a rose. In fact, the common name for it is prairie rose. And then there's some roses in this also. Those are all focal flowers. And then your line flowers up at the right hand and around is some veronica, and that's giving some interest with the lines. The greenery in this one is some silver dollar eucalyptus. Of course, we can't grow eucalyptus very well in this area, but we can grow it as an annual. And I will talk about that later. Filler flowers, there's some astilbe in this. Not a whole lot of filler flowers, but that's kind of give you an idea of different types of flowers. So the focal flowers, again, like I said, are usually the largest flowers. Your eye is drawn to them. Oftentimes they're the most expensive flowers that's in a bouquet. They're usually a single stem. They're often placed in the center of a bouquet and with your other flowers around it. So I'm going to start this morning talking about flowers, and dahlias are the hottest rage right now. Everybody wants to grow dahlias. Probably 20 years ago, I started planting my first dahlias. After one summer, I said I would never grow them again. The insect pressure was so high. They were just full of bugs. They just didn't do well for me at all. And now that more and more people are growing dahlias, there's a couple tricks to growing them. You can propagate them by seed, tubers, or stem cuttings. Tubers are by far the easiest. If you get one, next year you'll have 5. The year after that, you'll have 10. They do multiply quite well. But we do have to lift them every fall, and then we plant them every spring. So it's not something that's going to be able to keep out, but it does come back year after year. So I'm calling it an annual, I guess, but it might be considered a perennial because it's the same plant. They do like to have support. So if you can put up some sort of netting, that works really good. And they like to be mulched. I have found that my dahlias do best in an area that they get full sun.
Is that what it is? Mm-hmm. Okay.
That afternoon shade, they just have a hard time taking full sun here in Kansas. I just found they do so much better if they get a little shade in the heat of the afternoon. Do pinch the terminal shoot as they're coming up. Pinch that first flower out and you'll get branching. And then harvest when the flowers are 75% open. Dahlias are a flower that you cannot pick early. It has to be mostly open because as a bud, it will not open. The vase life runs from 7 to 10 days with floral food. Without floral food, it's about 3 to 5 days. I really have learned to love the dahlias. These are some dahlia roots that I wasn't sure if they were any good or not. And so what I do is the ones that I see eyes on and do very well, I just plant directly into the ground. And I usually plant around the middle of May when the ground level ground temperature has gotten warm enough. We've planted as late as June and had very good luck. But these were some I couldn't tell if the eyes were any good or not. So I put them in crates with a little bit of soil. I didn't even cover them up. And once they start putting on a stem and showing some leaves, we go ahead and lift them here and plant them in the ground. Oftentimes a dahlia a bulb will look so dry and shriveled and horrible. And all of a sudden you plant it and it comes alive and does a wonderful, wonderful flower. Nice thing about dahlias, there's all different kinds of dahlias. The singles there at the top, the anemone flowered ones, colorette, which has the inside that's a fuzzy flower with flowers around the outside, the peony flowered ones. Those are oftentimes the dinner plate dahlias, lots of decorative ones, the pom-poms that are more round, and then a cactus, which are kind of feathery. So there's a lot of variety in your dahlias, and they're just a real fun thing to experiment with. Don't discount them the way I did years ago, because I found that they really are kind of fun, but they do take a fair amount of work because you're digging them and replanting them each year. I was going to talk mostly about annuals today, but when we're talking about focal flowers, hydrangeas are something that we can grow and put in our bouquets. I really like the more cone-shaped ones. I grow a lot of the old Annabelles also. I don't grow very many of the blue Nico and real specialty ones, simply because the expense of the plants versus what I can harvest off of them as a flower grower. I want something that's really going to give me a lot of flowers for a fewer inputs. But I really like my old Annabelles, and I like the Limelight. There's one called Firelight that is a cone-shaped one that is pink. I really like a lot of those. With hydrangeas, you want to harvest them not when they're first blooming, but let them get a little bit of sturdiness to them. I really don't like to harvest hydrangeas till probably mid to late July. And and they hold a lot better for you. Of course, they want moist soil, and if you can give them partial shade, they'll be a lot happier. They usually bloom on new wood. There's different varieties, of course, but most of them bloom on new wood, so you don't have to worry about, you can cut them back if you need to. I usually cut mine back about once every 2 or 3 years. I put spurrier iris in here too. Now you can cut, you know, the bearded iris and different kinds, but I really like these spurrier iris. Here again, it's a perennial, and I've had them in the ground for years and years. Might divide them from time to time, but they're nice and tall. They have a long stem, and the bloom will last almost a week, which most of your irises, the bloom will last a day to maybe 3 days at the most. These are nice, a very delicate iris. They're very much sword-like leaves. I just really like them full sun, and they just take any weather and they keep coming back and produce and produce. They spread pretty well for you. And so anything that's a little bit on the, I don't want to say it's not noxious, it's invasive. It could be invasive, but I really like that because that's going to provide me with a lot of flowers. Here again, another perennial. And I just put these in here because there's something that everybody likes. In the spring, who doesn't love lilacs? Here again, easy to grow, a nice woody that's a good decorative in your garden, in your lawn. Do cut into warm water with a preservative. And everything I've ever been told is don't cut the ends, you know, with your woodies. Do not cut an X in the bottom of them, because how can they take up water better that way? This is one woody that I have found does better if you do cut the X in the branch at the bottom, and it will absorb water better. Let's see, something else about the old-fashioned varieties are really coming back as something that people want a lot of. So if you can get those, but I also cut a lot on my Korean lilacs that are very prolific, and we get a lot of flowers off of those. Lilies, here again, it's considered a perennial, but we grow them as an annual. We buy in chilled bulbs, and we actually have a program where the first bulbs will come in March, the second bulbs will come in April, the next one's in May. And so we're planting lily bulbs all the time, but you can leave them in the ground. If you're harvesting them for cut flowers, it's best to not cut too much back. You always want to leave at least 4 inches of stem on the plant. And so you don't want to pick, you want to pick these just when they have color, but not when they're open. Once they're open, a lot of times we won't even cut them because they're too far along. Or if one is open and there's enough buds, we'll go ahead and pick them and take the flower that's open off, because we don't have room in the cooler for flowers that are open. Now, they last a long time, so that's the nice thing about a lily. You can pick a lily, and if we keep it in the cooler, we can keep a lily in the cooler for 3 to 4 weeks without any problem, and it'll still bloom out very nicely. But this is how we would be picking our lilies here at the farm, all in bud, and then opening them when we want to. We would take these out on a Friday looking like this, and by Saturday morning at farmer's market, they'll be fully open and gorgeous, ready to go. Lots of types of lilies to choose from, of course. The Asiatics are my favorite. That's the one in the bottom center. It kind of looks upwards. I like it because in a bouquet, it looks at you. It's always looking up. The Orientals I love, the pink one in the upper left. The only problem is the flowers do go to the side, and in making bouquets, especially for farmers market, it's hard to get them to market without breaking them. The LA hybrids are kind of a mix between the two of those. We've started growing a lot of the rose lilies, which is on the bottom left. They're a double lily, and I really like them. They're very fragrant. And then we have a few of the longiflorum, I can't even say it now, longiflorum, but that's like an Easter lily or the old-fashioned tiger lilies. We use them, but you have to kind of really stick them up high out of a bouquet to use for a bouquet. Lizzie Antonys, next flower. This is the one that everybody wants to know. How do I grow Lizzie Antonys? Well, you can plant your seeds anytime from, some people will start in October. I usually start mine in the middle of January. I'm not huge on getting the earliest ones out. I also buy plugs And so a little plug is one that's already growing and has about 4 to 5 leaves on it. So I'll buy in plugs just to make sure that I have some, and then I start my own seeds also. It takes sometimes over 2 weeks for the seed to germinate, and when it does germinate, you might need a magnifying glass to see that it's even there. For anybody who has started Lizzie Antonys from seed, you know what I'm talking about. It's a very long process to get it going, but you really feel like you've done something afterwards. If you want to keep the seeds moist, a lot of people will keep them in a pan of water and put a tray over the top of them. I just keep them on my heating pad in the greenhouse, and we do water quite often, so we just never let them dry out, but I use a very fine mist when I'm watering the plug trays. On Lizzie Antonys, when you get them out, I like to plant, I start planting Lizzie Antonys usually the middle to the end of March. Now I'm growing these in a high tunnel. I found that growing them outside without any protection, I just don't get the length, the stem length that I need. So I like to have them in some sort of protection. If you can even do low row covers, that would help. You want to pinch that terminal bud so that you'll get a lot more branching. The more flowers you're going to get, the better. But the vase life on these is at least 2 weeks. They last forever. Everybody thinks they're roses. Everybody's just in love with Lizzie Antonys, and it's one of the most popular flowers being grown right now as cut flowers. We do use netting on these because they can fall over once they get tall, but there you can see we have quite a few buds on those. On the left-hand side, there are the little, those are ones that I started from seed, and they're probably 2 months old. So it takes them quite a while to get to that point, but once they get to that point, they do grow quite a bit. You want to keep them cool in the early spring. So if you have anything that you can protect them outside, a cold frame would be great. They like it cold. They want their roots to be growing. If they get too hot, though, they'll start to grow, and you don't want them to start giving you length when they're little bitty like this. You want to wait until it's really warm that they start putting up the stems and the flowers. Peonies, here again, I'm talking about all perennials. I apologize, but we'll get into some annuals. I bring peonies up because this is probably what got us started in the flower business. We bought a field of peonies over by Silver Lake, Kansas, dug them and brought them back to our farm. We like them because they bloom in May, and we were picking asparagus at that time, and so it added to our season in the spring. Nothing is more showy than peonies in the spring. You can buy the roots anytime now. You can get them in the fall bare root, or you can get them in the spring if they've been potted into pots at a garden center. Don't try and transplant these in the spring. If you're going to transplant them, be sure to do it after the 1st of September. You can leave all the greenery up, and then after the 1st of September, you can just cut them down and then move them at any time. We harvest all the buds, all the peonies in bud stage. If it has bloomed, it's considered not a sellable flower for us. We pick them in the marshmallow stage. And when I say marshmallow, you're going to put your thumb on the top of the plant, on the bud, and push down. It's not a side to side, it's from the top. Some buds will be 1 inch in diameter, and some will be 3 inches in diameter. The size of the bud doesn't have anything to do with it because each variety has a different size bud. But by picking them in the marshmallow stage, we have a much longer vase life. If you pick them in the field, bring them in, they won't last but a couple days. But if you pick them in the bud, bring them in, let them open inside, they'll last at least a week. It also keeps all the ants out. Everybody's concerned about ants. They can't get in while it's in a bud stage. And yes, it is a wives' tale that the ants are needed to open the peonies. They will open just fine without ants. We remove probably 3/4 of the leaves. If it's a rainy day, we probably take all the leaves off. And then we put them in bunches of 10. We store them dry and cold. So we would put 10 to a bunch, wrap it in, we put them in a cellophane. You can do it in newspaper. If you do it in newspaper, you just have to replace that paper whenever it gets wet. in the refrigerator. And then we keep them cold as possible. I like to keep them at about 34 to 36 degrees. We don't want them to freeze, but they do want to stay cold, and that will keep them kind of in a dormant space. And we will hold peonies till the 1st of August, usually without any problem. And then what we have left, we'll go ahead and open and dry, and we'll hang to dry to use in dried flowers. When you take them out of the plastic, cut an inch or two off the bottom, put them in some warm water with some Floral Life, with some floral preservative in it. And depending on how long they have been held in the cooler, they'll open right up. The ones that we open in July take a matter of less than an hour to open. The ones that we open maybe a week after we harvest in May, those are going to take maybe 4 or 5 hours to open. But they'll open perfectly, and it's a miracle every time. Sunflowers. And everybody, we live in Kansas, so we have to grow sunflowers. There's all kinds of sunflowers. They can be 3 to 6 feet tall. And a lot of the height is determined by how close you plant them. The closer they're planted, the shorter they're going to be, and the smaller the heads. The farther apart you plant them, the taller and the larger heads they're going to be. So for bouquets, oftentimes we like a smaller sunflower, so we plant those pretty close. You can plant sunflowers, 6 inches apart is pretty close for me. Then we have others that will be planting 8 to 9 inches apart. You get a foot apart and you're getting pretty big sunflowers with a pretty hefty stem on them. We always grow pollenless varieties. I don't grow any sunflowers with pollen, just because I don't want my customers to come back next week and say, well, there's pollen all over my kitchen table and it's ruined my tablecloth. So we only do the pollenless ones, and they last a lot longer. I think they'd probably last 2 weeks, even with bad water. So we harvest when there's like one petal up, or when they're starting to look like they're looking at you. I like to harvest them early. That way we don't have to worry about bugs eating holes in the petals. And then we hold them in the cooler. And then when we want them to open, we just bring them out into the barn and they'll open within a day. Sunflowers are one thing that really don't care for floral preservatives. You can put it in, it won't hurt them, but they really don't need it. In trials, they've found that they last just as long with or without that. But sunflowers are just so gorgeous. We just have to grow more sunflowers. There are a lot of single stem varieties. Here again, we talked about pollenless. They're quick to bloom, 60 days from seeding. And what I have found that late in the season, they'll be under 60 days. So if you plant sunflowers in April, they may not bloom until 4th of July. But if you plant sunflowers we planted them as late as 1st of September, and they bloomed before, they bloomed that first week of October. There are good day neutral varieties, and they do grow pretty consistent on those days, but the earlier you plant them, they'll still be a little bit longer, and the later you plant them, they'll be a little quicker. Here again, you can crowd them. I don't think there's anything else on here that I need to talk about. There's one flower from one seed, and so that is an issue. You have to be planting them all the time. So we like to plant sunflowers every 2 weeks. We're putting in a batch of sunflowers. We start all of ours from seed in the greenhouse and transplant them out. I know that's the hard way of doing it, but we have a terrible vole problem, and they eat the seeds as soon as we put them in the ground. So if we put a plant out there, we have a better chance of keeping the sunflowers going. There are a lot of branching varieties, and they produce many, many blooms for a long time. And I know a lot of the pick your own flower people are using these. Most of these are not pollenless, so that's an issue for me. But they have colors that are just wonderful. So if you need a certain color, a lot of the branching varieties are good. The stems aren't as strong, and they take a little bit longer to bloom, and they require a lot of space. and they have a shorter base life. So I really don't grow branching varieties, but I know there is a place for branching varieties, and I think you don't want to overlook them. I've just tried to, I'm at the point that I have to decide which ones are going to be best for me to grow in what space I have. And so these I don't grow, but I'm not telling you you shouldn't grow them either. Any questions about focal flowers? I guess we should stop and take any questions.
Does it help to let tap water set a day or two before using with cut flowers?
I guess if you have, if you're on city water, that probably would. It would probably get rid of some of the chlorine, if there's a lot of chlorine. It depends on what's in your water. You know, that would be a real luxury to be able to set water aside. When we're in the harvest stage, we're filling buckets as fast as we can and moving on. So possibly, but I don't think it would make that much difference.
Okay. What are day neutral sunflower varieties?
Oh, most of your day neutral, the Vincents are day neutral, Pro Cut are day neutral. One of your best catalogs is your Johnny's catalog, and they have a chart in there and it lists all the different sunflowers and which ones are day neutral, which ones are pollenless, and it's real easy to select that way.
Do you grow any roses?
I don't grow roses because if I grew roses, that's all I would grow. I grow everything else. I mean, I have some roses that are growing, but not for cut flowers. It's just not, it's not profitable for me to grow roses for sale. I know a couple growers who do, but when you can buy roses, you know, for less than $1 a stem, it's really hard to compete as a flower grower on that. We live in Kansas. We're going to go ahead and start with some secondary focal flowers. These again would probably be single stem, large, but they would add depth to the framework and draw emphasis to the focal flowers. So they're just not quite as showy, basically. One of my favorites are allium bulbs. You can plant them out anytime now and they'll still bloom for you this spring. And then they naturalize well, and we do lots and lots of alliums. They bloom in May, which of course for me is really good because that is the same time my peonies are growing, which I may want to bring something up about that. I'm not talking about ranunculus and anemones and things that you really have to have covered facilities for to grow. And I don't really worry about growing lots of tulips or any bulbs other than the alliums in the spring because they're so early. For me, it just doesn't work because I'm picking 20 acres of asparagus and I'm busy enough. So we have found that we're not doing a lot of early flowers, but I will take questions on those. I know a little bit about it. So, but the alliums come on, we pick them as soon as they have color. They're not a full ball when we pick them, maybe a quarter open, but they have a very long vase life. And then of course they have a very nice dried ball that can be used in dried flowers later. So it's one of my favorites. Asclepius, this is one that people don't realize is a good cut flower. I usually don't use the perennial, except, well, the perennial, the orange one out in the fields, in the prairies. I don't use those except in the week or two that they're blooming, and it's usually for an event that has to do with the prairie. Because I don't pick a lot of that, but I do grow the annual varieties. And one of the problems, it does have, you know, that sappiness to it. And a lot of people will cut them and they put them directly into water and they just bend over. They're just not very good. So what I have found, my trick to growing Asclepius is to harvest it. I cut the stem and I just lay it on the ground, and I lay it on the ground for about 20 minutes, and that causes it to dry up. All that sap dries up, and then I go back and then put it in water. And then I want to pick this a day or two before we're going to be using it also. And that will give us a long-lasting cut flower. This is one you want to be a little bit careful of because some people are going to be allergic to that sap in there. But it's a nice color that we don't get that much early in the season. You know, early season is going to be your pinks and purples, blues. And this is something that gives us a little bit more that orangey color early in the season. I put a stilbe in here if for all those people who want to put in a cut flower garden, but all they have is shade, they can grow a stilbe. And a stilbe is highly sought after by florists. So it's a wonderful thing. You want to keep it moist, a very much organic soil, and it will grow around cedar trees, which is a good thing. I had some growing around cedar trees until we were hit by a tornado 2 years ago, and now I don't have any Astilbe anymore, but I love it. It's a great filler flower that gives, it also gives a line that is really good in arrangement. Bachelor buttons, this is one that you can just throw those seeds out. You can throw them out in the fall or the early spring. They're not fussy at all. I like to stir the soil up a little bit, put them out there, and then tamp it down. I also found that netting will help these. Biggest problem with bachelor buttons is harvesting them. The more you harvest, the more there are, and they have this skinny stem, and everybody's tired of harvesting them too early. They just take a lot of work for the flower. And it's the one I get complaints about from my employees. Oh, we have to go pick those again. But it comes in beautiful colors, blues, pinks, whites, some burgundies now. Blue Salvia is another one. Here again, it's not as tall. There are some tall varieties, but it is a good flower as a filler. You know, your blue bedders and that sort of thing. They will, they're just a standard in the garden. That you can have them there as a landscape flower, and you can also use them as a cut flower. And they really don't have any pests that bother them. So that's the nice thing about any of the salvias. And the salvias, I should say, you can start from seed inside or buy plants. That's an easy one. I should be telling you how to get these things started. I keep forgetting. Campanulas, here again, it's a perennial, but I grow them as annuals mostly, simply because they're a short-lived perennial. And there's lots and lots of varieties. The Champion series, which is the white one there on the left, is really good. Can't remember the names of all of them here. It's a pink cathedral bell, or pink bells, I think is the one on the left. And then they're really nice bell flowers. They need fairly damp soil, but well drained. Of course, you know, that's like everything. Yeah, they don't want to be too wet and they don't want to be too dry. And you can grow these in light shade. So that's another one that if you don't have full sun, you know, most of these flowers are going to take full sun, and these can take some shade. And they have a very long base life, 7 to 10 days. So when I'm doing bouquets that I'm selling at farmers market, people will come back, you know, after a week and say, "Oh, my flowers from last week are still looking good." And I tell them, well, you know, gosh, I try and make it so they only last 6 days so that you'll come back and buy another one. But these are they're going to last the full week for you. Crested Celosia. And this is one of those flowers that people either love them or they hate them. It is probably about the easiest flower that we can grow in Kansas. It loves the heat. It's really kind of a tropical plant. There's varieties from 6 inches to 4 and 5 feet tall. And they range everywhere from yellow through oranges, the reds, the pinks, the burgundies. There's a lot of new varieties that are salmon. There's just a lot of variety. You can purchase small plants in the spring or direct seed in the garden. If you direct seed them, you're not going to get flowers until later in the season, but it depends on what you're going for. We start all of ours in the greenhouse. Oh, we usually start Celosia by seed. Gosh, as late as the 1st of May even, because we don't want to get it out there too early because it really dislikes cold weather. But the other reason we like Celosia, other than for the flower head, the leaves make for excellent filler. And like I said before, it's hard to get good green filler, but Celosia has very few pests that bother it. And so the leaves are great. And some of the leaves are green, but we have a lot of varieties that have a burgundy or pink leaf, and so we really like that. We use small heads in bouquets. Most of the large heads we'll use as a focal flower, or we just sell by the stem that people like to have a specimen flower on their table. I really like celosia. We sell tons and tons and tons of it. It's something the florists love that they can't get. It doesn't ship well. So we really like our celosias. That was the crested celosia. There's also a lot of different plumed celosias, and people are learning that this is a great filler flower. Again, easy to grow. It likes it hot. It can take really dry weather. It blooms midsummer to frost. You do want to harvest this before it starts to put the little black seeds on it. With the crested, the little seeds are a nuisance later in the year, but they're not, the flower doesn't look any different. The plumed celosia will start to look a little tired when it has all those little black seeds at the bottom. Of course, you can harvest all those seeds and use those for your plants for next year. When saving seed for celosia or anything else, of course, you want to keep your plants separated. So if you have 6 different colors of plumed celosia, don't plant them together, or you don't know what you're going to have, because they will cross-pollinate. And I have several friends who've been selecting, their favorite colors over the years, and they've saved them that way. But you really do need to keep it separate so you don't get just kind of a mishmash of, you don't know what you're going to have. And of course, I'm the person who, I plant all the red ones together, all the orange ones together, all the yellow ones together, because when we're harvesting, I don't want a bucket of a whole bunch of different colors. I want a bucket of red, I want a bucket of orange, and a bucket of yellow. So it's just one of those things when you're doing it for a level where you're going to be making bouquets, you don't want to have to pick through a bucket to get the right one. Cosmos. Here again, we do start cosmos in the greenhouse. You don't have to, you can just put it out and they'll grow just fine. And I think probably direct seeding is actually better because you're going to get stockier plants. But just rake up the soil, put them down. It does need to be warmer before you put it out. Don't put it out first thing in the season. I wouldn't probably plant these here again until mid to late May, and then keep them moist and they'll come up. Once they come up, as fine as they look, they are fairly drought tolerant, and you think that they need to be babied, but really don't do that. They'll just keep coming. Biggest problem I have is trying to get them before I do have a bug issue, insect pressure on the leaves. But the foliage is always gorgeous. So if you can, and they put on enough flowers, you really don't have to worry. You're going to have enough. Just pick the best ones, if that makes any sense. You can grow a lot of them for they're not expensive seed, but it's great filler flowers. Great little, they're focal themselves, just small. Craspedia. This is one that everybody's trying to grow right now. The little billy balls is a common name for it. They're great for bouquets. It's that bright yellow color, and you can have them set up at the top of the bouquet, and it really adds some fun. I like to plant these about once every 3 to 4 weeks. You could do it more as a succession planting to have them all the time. We just never have done that. We just kind of have them when we have them, and they're a specialty thing. They get about 2 feet tall. I don't get them near as tall outside as I would in the high tunnel. So if you have a high tunnel or something to cover them with, they'll get taller. But out in the field, you'll get a good 2-foot stem on them. Here again, that's one seed, one. You don't get a lot of multiple flowers out of them. They're just very much a single, so you have to replant all the time if you want them throughout the summer. Dianthus, one of my favorites. Of course, there's a lot of there's perennial dianthus, there's biannual, and there's annual dianthus. What we are growing for cutting are annual dianthus, and these are the neon varieties, neon rose. There's some bicolors. The biannual ones are the old-fashioned ones, and you plant those in the fall and they will bloom the next year. They have to be vernalized. I have found that I really like all the new varieties that will bloom without vernalization, and I get a taller stem on them. There's the neons, like I said, the Sweet series is another one that does really well, and they have a beautiful white one that is good for wedding work. And they have a burgundy that's called it's a cherry, and there's a dark burgundy, and so those colors are real popular right now. In doing bouquets, we try and follow trends of what colors are popular. I live in Lawrence, so purple is hardly ever popular, but every once in a while we'll sell a purple bouquet. I start Dianthus in January in the greenhouse to get it going. And then we used to put it in a high tunnel, but we lost that high tunnel. So now we're just putting them outside and putting a little protection on them early, because the longer we can keep them in root production, the taller the stems will be when it warms up. They have a super long base life, almost 2 weeks. So it's a great cut flower. But they're pretty much done by 4th of July, so don't expect them to be there all year long for you. Echinacea is a perennial I put in here just because we live in Kansas and a lot of people want the prairie look. All the echinaceas work really well. Here again, one of the biggest problems is bug bites on the petals, but if you get a lot of pest issues, then you can just take the petals off and use the cones, and they work really good. There's all sorts of new varieties that are yellow and orange and reds. I have not had a lot of good luck of keeping those for very long. They're more like a 2 or 3 year plant, but they are very unique, and it gives us that prairie look that a lot of people are after. You do want to pick these when the petals are straight out. Once they start to droop, it's not going to last near as long. Peppers. We grow a ton of ornamental peppers. The bright red cone ones, which are also known as Thai peppers, are great in fresh arrangements, and then we also dry them. We do a lot of kitchen wreaths for people with the red ones. We want to plant these just like we would any other pepper. We don't want to plant them too early because they'll get stunted in cold weather, but plant them out, and then they'll take all the heat. And peppers are one of those things we think, well, peppers are hot, they shouldn't take a whole lot of water. Peppers are water hogs. They take all the water you can give them in the summertime, and they're going to do great for you. We harvest them when the color starts to appear. And then I say sweat the leaves off. A real cool way, leaves are interesting sometimes, and they add filler for your bouquets, but sometimes, especially if you're going to be drying the peppers, you want those leaves off so the peppers really show. What we do is we put them in plastic containers that are stackable. You just want to put them in a container that there's no air in. And then we put them in a warm space. So we usually just put them in the greenhouse under a table and let them sit for 3 days. And in 3 days, the leaves just fall off. That's called sweating. And we can still use the stem, the pepper full of the stem of peppers. We can still use that in flower bouquets, and they will be just fine. But getting those leaves off, that's kind of the trick with those. Phlox, here's another perennial, but I just love it for some flowers. I really like the David, the white ones. They probably don't have a vase life as long as a lot of the other flowers, but it's a nice grandma flower, I think, if somebody wants a romantic bouquet. And varieties like this white David are fragrant, so that's really nice to have. Here again, on most of these perennials, you're going to start out with plants. You can start with seed, but you're adding a year or two to their flowering. So I usually just start with plants on those that you can get about anywhere. Rudbeckia. There are perennial ones and there are annual ones. The perennial ones, let's see, the Goldstrom is the perennial. They bloom later than the annual ones do. They'll bloom more in August. So there's a place for those. But the ones that I really use as a workhorse are all the annual varieties. or they're biennial, and they will often reseed. So black-eyed Susans are great. It's like a sunflower, only smaller. You want to harvest them when they're first starting to open, but they need to be open enough to hold. If you pick them when they're not open at all, they'll just droop. So you want them open, but not too open. They're short-lived. A lot of people just call them all perennials. And like I said, they will reseed usually before that plant comes back. We used to grow a lot of prairie sun. I really liked it, but so many more. The prairie sun is the one in the lower left. It has a kind of a green eye. There's another one called Irish eyes that is even more green eye. We were growing a lot of those, but we found that we're not getting the stem length on those that we like. So we've really gone with the varieties with a longer stem. Even the regular Rudbeckia hirta, just the old standard, works really well. We get a longer stem for them. There's fall colored ones, autumn leaves. I can't remember the name of it. There's some dark colored ones. They don't sell except in the fall. So they don't sell very well when they're actually blooming in June and July. So we don't grow those too much. But most of these will start blooming about the second week of June and run through the middle of August. And then about the 1st of August, the one on the bottom right here is triloba, is Rudbeckia triloba, and it will start blooming. And the trilobas are more of a bush than they are a regular flower plant. So they'll get 3 to 4 feet tall and have side stems that you can then cut off. And as a filler flower, that's just fabulous in August when everything, August is a tough month here. It's just hot and things are looking tough. These guys look so bright and cheery. They're one of my favorites. All of these you would want to use a preservative with. And in fact, if you're going to be harvesting any of these when it is hot, I would use a hydrator. And that is something that you might be able to get from a florist, or we buy it from Crisol, which is a company that provides us with all of our flower food. A hydrator just makes it take the water up faster, and we put them in the hydrator and we never have a problem with them drooping. Safflower, not a very common flower that people grow, but I like to do a couple of these a year. It's kind of an orange, looks, this isn't the safflower that you're going to be using in cooking. It's kind of more poor man's safflower, but you can direct seed these, or you can start them earlier in the greenhouse. Here again, they like it to be warm when you plant them. Give them enough room because they do get large, and they can tolerate drought. They're best in the fall. I mean, they sell best in the fall, being that orange color. They're not a real springy flower at all, but I would use them for the fall. Scabiosa, again, one of my favorite flowers, and the biggest problem is picking it because there's so many stems and so many flowers, and there's one flower per stem. There are perennial varieties, but I found I really like the annuals better. They're larger and they're just more prolific. Harvest the centers when we're fully unfurled. There's some of them that will have the little buds there in the middle, and you can pick those, but you want them when they're pretty much not fully open, but probably 50% open. And the vase life is 5 to 12 days. I found that the annuals have a longer vase life than the perennials, in my opinion. And the colors go from white. I have a yellow one, the burgundy, and blues, of course, and purples are always popular. Here again, you might want to use a hydrator on these, especially if it's a hot day, because they are blooming in the heat of the summer, and they might need a little help to get that water up that stem. If you don't use a hydrator, go ahead and bring them into a shaded area that doesn't have wind. So I just bring them into my barn and let them set for an entire day or even overnight. And that way they'll be able to pump that water up into their stem. Straw flowers. I thought that the days of straw flowers had long gone. They were really popular in the 70s and 80s, and they were known mostly as a dried flower, but I'm seeing more and more people use these as a fresh cut flower. Very easy to start. I do start these in the greenhouse. the seeds inside. I've never direct seeded them, so I'm not sure how that would work. But the more you cut, the more you'll get. And it will tolerate dry conditions. But here again, when you pick them, they'll droop a little bit. So let them sit in a dark, non-windy area and let them sit overnight, and they'll do just fine. And they will open and close according to how humid it is. So a lot of times we'll load our vans for market at night, and they're open. And then in the humidity of the van, they'll close up, or when it gets cool, they'll kind of close up. And then at farmer's market, they'll open back up again. Excellent for drying. Lots of uses for these. People, like I said, it's one of these things that's coming back. We used to grow a lot of them, then we quit growing them, and now we're growing them again. And they're coming in more colors, so we're getting a lot of pinks and whites and salmon colors that are more popular too. And of course, if we're going to talk about cut flowers, we're going to talk about zinnias. I mean, this is the staple. You can just throw the seeds out on the ground. You want to harvest them. You can throw the seeds out. Here again, I start almost everything in little plugs so that I can just plant them out, because I do have this pressure of voles that like to eat seeds. You want to pick them before the pollen really sets in. So all of these right here are pretty much ready to be harvested. If you notice that when they start to have the little yellow stars all the way around the outside, that's pollen that's starting to show. It's a little past its prime, and they won't last as long. Base life is 7 days with preservative. We also use chlorine tablets that you can get. Probably you'd have to go to a flower grower, or we get it from Crisol, which is a supplier in Florida. And that chlorine, zinnias, rudbeckias, anything that has a real hairy stem, it's nice to put those in, and it keeps the disease down. That's the biggest reason zinnias often go down, is because they have all this dirt and gunk on their stem. The other thing with zinnias, it's a perfect example of when you're cutting your flowers, you want to pick a long stem. The longer the stem that you pick the first time, the longer your second stem will be. If you just pick little, if you deadhead a plant, all you're going to have is lots of little short stems. And as a cut flower grower, the money is in the length of your stem. So you want to cut, the longer the stem you cut, the longer your next stem will be. You may not get as many flowers, but that's not the purpose when we're doing cut flowers. Any questions about all that?
Will chlorine tablets that are used in swimming pools work?
No, I'd be real leery of that. The concentration would be so much more.
And I know you talked
I don't have a swimming pool, so I'm really not sure.
And I'm having a senior moment. I know we talked about day neutral plants, that you can get them through the catalog. Somebody asked, what does day neutral mean?
Day neutral means that it will grow in the same amount of time in short days as it does in long days. There's some plants that will not bloom until they get into long days. So you can plant most sunflowers, if they're not a day neutral sunflower, if you plant them early, they're going to take a lot longer to bloom. They're not going to bloom until the day gets long. A lot of your perennials are that way. They won't bloom until it gets a long day. Other ones will want to be short day. So like in the fall, your asters or mums are an example. They want they want to grow in the long days, and then they're going to bloom in the short days.
Okay, thanks for explaining. That's our questions so far.
Okay, we're going to talk about a few filler flowers. And like I said, some of the ones we've talked about are filler flowers already, but these are things that really fill in all those gaps and cover any problems. If you have a big gap in a bouquet, you stick in a filler flower. One of my favorites is Achillea or yarrow. And of course, you have the Coronation Gold, the big yellow ones, but then there's also all the millefolium varieties that come in purple and red and yellow and orange and salmon. And these guys take no care. And they take about any type of soil. Of course, it wants full sun. Almost all of these flowers, unless I say it will take some shade, are full sun flowers. You want to harvest these though, especially the millefoliums, when you're starting to see just a little bit of pollen. Because if you don't have that little bit of pollen showing, they're not mature enough and they will droop. So the millefolium varieties, you want to see a little bit of pollen. You could use a hydrator on them, but it really would work best just to wait until you have that pollen on them, and then they'll last a long time, and they'll last over a week without any problem. These I usually start with plants. I do start millefolium from seed, but they don't really bloom until the next year. Every once in a while you might get a bloom the first year, but I really like to have them a little farther along before I would plant them out. Ageratum. There are tall varieties. Blue Horizon has been around forever, is the variety. There's a blue Dondo, that's what it is, that I like a lot. There's pink and white varieties, but I've never been very happy with any of them. The blue ones are really the only ones I really like. This is another one. Cut the longest stem you can, because then you're going to get longer stems. If you cut just little short stuff, you're never going to get a tall enough flower to do anything with. But it's a really good summertime and fall blue color. Your blues and purples are almost all in the spring. So it's anytime we can get a blue flower late in the summer, we're pretty happy. It, of course, wants well-drained soil, like almost all of these. And I really like it. The flower, you'll get, probably 6 to 10 flowers, and it will be about 2 inches in diameter. Has good foliage, very little pest problems with it at all. And then in the fall, the butterflies just love it. In fact, we work with Monarch Watch a little bit on our farm, and they have come out and done research, and they found that a lot of the females will really like to flutter around the ageratum once it's been cut down. It's a real good popular plant they like it for some reason. And we haven't done, we've just done a little research on it, but that's one of those that the butterflies really, really do like. Queen Anne's lace. This is one again that you can plant in the fall, or you can plant in the spring and just throw those seeds out, cover it up just a little bit. There's all different kinds, that from the regular old time Queen Anne's lace to newer variety. The Graceland I have found has a 10-day base life. The older just plain Queen Anne's lace, it's usually about 6 to 7 days, but then the white, they start to fall down. Direct seed it. And you can plant this several times through the year. You don't have to have it just when in the spring, the first time it comes on. You can do succession seedings and get this throughout. It does need to have the umbels fairly well developed before you harvest it. If they're still green at all, they really don't hold up. So when the white comes on, or there's pink and there's purple ones too, when they start to show a color, they're probably a little bit better to go at that time. I think that's about it on that. That's one of those common ones that's just people love. And once you get it established in your garden, if you just let it reseed, you'll always have it in the garden too. We have a couple of things that we're going to talk about that are like that, if you have an area that you just let them reseed in that area, then you're going to have an area of Queen Anne's lace. Carnations, and who would have thought that I'd ever be talking about carnations, because carnations have been kind of the bane of local cut flower growers, because carnations are those things that are brought in from, South America, and we're trying to compete with these cheap flowers. Well, they're really pushing a lot of these scented French heirloom carnations. They say they're perennial, but I've never had them come back. So, and they're not huge, they're not super tall, but I get a 24-inch stem out of them. I start them indoors, and I usually start them late January, 1st of February. Super long-lasting flowers, lots of fragrance, and you can see the colors are really nice. The yellow is really, really nice. I get the seed for these from, well, first ones I got were from Johnny's. You can get them there. As far as, that's one thing, seed catalogs. I get most of my flower seed from a company called Geo. It's Geo. The only problem with them, they're a small company in Mississippi or Georgia. They're from the South anyway. Here, I have the catalog here. Where are they at? They're in, South Carolina. Anyway, and they have a fabulous catalog with, and they carry so many varieties of seeds. Of course, they have no pictures, so you kind of have to know what you're looking for. And like the world has discovered them in the last few years, and they, right now, they are running about 6 weeks behind on seed orders. So if you're ordering today, you won't get your seeds until mid-February. But a lot of the people who are growing lots and lots of flowers, they go there. The price is excellent. But Johnny's has a great selection of these also, and it's not that much difference. And Johnny's is, we just got some Johnny's stuff. We got it within a week. So some companies are doing, are able to keep up right now. Some are having a tough time with all the lack of employees and that sort of thing. But Geo Seed and Johnny Seed, those are both two really good places to get a lot of these seeds. I put Euringium in here simply because I've had more requests for this flower than ever from brides and events. They just like those little thistles. And this is a perennial and it's really hardy. I always start with plants, we can start it from seed, but again, you're going to be a year behind that way. And they're just really popular. And here again, it's a blue flower that usually blooms late July, 1st of August. So it gives you that color later in the season. People really like it. Easy to grow. I mean, you can't kill it. We have an area that it has just become native, and we mow it down and it comes back. So great plant, and it's really popular right now. Gomphrena. If you're going to have cut flowers, you want to grow Gomphrena. Don't grow the short varieties, only grow the tall varieties. The pink, the purple, the white are all going to be taller. There's also red and what they call carmine. It's a pinky burgundy color. They have a little bit different habit of growing. They're more single stem, and the single stem is going to be 18 inches long, where the purple, pink, and white ones are more of a bush, and you'll harvest a 18 to 20 inch stem and it'll have 15 flowers on it. So we also grow this just as a landscape plant. We plant them fairly close. We plant them about 8 inches apart, and it becomes a hedge. And we always plant them right next to the road because it looks so nice. When everything else looks awful in August and September and things are just a little tough, these guys are out there just blooming their heads off. Butterflies are all over them. They're just a fantastic flower to put in things. Easy to start from seed. Here again, I would start them in a greenhouse or on inside under lights, just to get them on a little bit faster, because they really come into their own in the fall, but the earlier you can get them going, the better. And here, I said here, the more you pick, the more will grow. This is another one that everybody complains about. Oh, we got to go pick Gomphrena. It's going to be all day. And the farther along they are, the stiffer the stems. So if they're really small, they're going to be kind of wimpy stems. So you want them to be a little bit larger ball before you harvest them, but you don't want them so big that the seeds are starting to fall out of them. So it's a fine line on picking. And they'll last, gosh, they'd last for 2 weeks. I don't think I've ever had Gomphrena go bad. It'll dry before it'll go bad. Lysimachia, and this is a perennial. I put this in here because we use the dickens out of this thing. And a lot of people will say, oh, no, you shouldn't. That's an invasive species. And, I just tell them, I live in Kansas. I don't have a problem with too much water. And this is one of the best things. I want it to be a little invasive so that I can really pick it. And we pick thousands of stems and put them in things. And the nice thing is that it has that little nodding flower on it, and it's movement in your bouquet if people really, really like it. You want to pick it, that the bottom one in the picture here, you want to pick it at that stage because you want it to be able to bloom out the rest of the way. You don't want to, if it's completely bloomed out, it's too far gone. So yeah, harvest when there's a third to half open. We do use a floral preservative on this, as with everything, but it will lengthen the time that it lasts. And it's a nice white, and it blooms later, a little bit later in the season. So it's a nice clear white that everybody likes it. And for wedding work, it's fabulous. Like I said, it moves as they're going down the aisle with the bouquet. It's going to be moving along with them. Matricaria or feverfew. This is considered a perennial in everything I've ever seen, but I grow it as an annual. It's very susceptible to aster yellows. And so if you have a lot of asters around, you might have a problem with it here. And you'll find this under Matricaria, or it could be under chrysanthemums. They keep changing how they're classifying these plants. A lot of people think it's chamomile. It looks like chamomile, only with a tall stem. It will bloom from the first year. So like I said, we grow it from seed, and we'll plant the seed end of January, and then we'll plant it out in April, trying to get it out while it's still cool. But that aster yellows is an issue, and aster yellows is a disease. If you haven't seen it, it'll turn the leaves kind of yellow, and it'll deform the flowers. But this flower is so gorgeous, and it has several different forms, everything from like a button to a chamomile-like flower that has little white petals. And for wedding work, I just can't be without it. It has a super long vase life, 10 days out of the cooler. We can keep it for 3 weeks in the cooler. So it's one that we're going to use a lot of. It's going to bloom mostly in mid-June to mid-July. Sedum, this is one I just put it in here because you can use it when it's green. You can use it when it's, pink or burgundy. You can use it when it's brown. It just lasts forever. And of course, if you want to start new ones, you just cut one off and stick it in the ground, and you've got more. It's one of the best plants. I just love it for a landscape plant, but don't overlook it for bouquets. Solidago, here's another one that people say, oh, this is a noxious weed, we don't want it. People think they're allergic to it. But Solidago has a very heavy pollen, so you're not allergic to it. If the only way you're going to get the pollen in your nose is to stick your nose into the flower. A lot of people think that it is ragweed. It is not. Ragweed is green, and this is yellow. They just bloom at the same time, so it gets all of the disgust, and people don't like it because of that. But it is a wonderful filler flower for the fall. Ragweed, the pollen is airborne. I mean, you look at it from 40 feet away, and it's bursting open with pollen. And the goldenrod does not do that. There's a lot of different varieties. I like the varieties that have a single head per stem. There's some that have multiple heads per stem. It's just easier to make a bouquet with a single stem. Cut before the flowers begin to open. I pick all my goldenrod while it's still green, and it looks like little green buds. And something I haven't said, we do pick flowers all week long. We pick Monday through Friday. And the ones that don't last very long, we'll pick on Thursday and Friday. But something like goldenrod, we'll pick it when it's ready. If it's green, we'll pick it and put it in the cooler, and we can keep it in there for several weeks and use it when we need it then. Statice, everybody knows statice. It was the big thing in the 80s when dried flowers were big. We used to preserve a lot of statice with glycerin, and I think we'll probably start doing that again this next year because dried flowers are coming back again. But this is a great filler flower. It comes in multiple colors. Start the seed indoors around the end of January. You can plant it out 1st of April. It can take a little bit of cold weather. Keep it fertilized, and then harvest when most of the flowers are open. And I've come up with a trick to explain to people how to pick statice. you want to squint your eyes, and at a flower, you'll have a row of flowers, and you squint your eyes. When you squint, the ones that are open will just pop out at you. The ones that are tighter, you won't see. So it's one of those things you have to try. Just think of squinting your eyes when you're picking status, and you'll be able to know which ones are ready. Because it needs to be mostly open when you harvest it. They don't open very well sometimes if you pick them too early. The flower in the status is actually that little white flower. If you look at the bottom of that picture, there's a blue stem it's blue, but it has little white flowers in it. That white flower is the actual flower. The blue is just the husk that's left around it. And that's why it dries, because it's just a husk around the flower. The white flower will disappear after a few days. Verbena bonariensis. I put this in here because we just like it. It's nice and airy. The biggest problem is it does shatter. And so if somebody wants a nice clean bouquet, we probably wouldn't put it in. But it just blooms and blooms and blooms. Another one that you can pick and pick and pick. You're going to pick it from the end of June until frost. And the butterflies will come, like if you want a butterfly flower, this is it. And the stems are very rigid, so you never have to worry about them drooping. It's just a nice flower to have in the cutting garden. And here again, you can start, I start these, I usually start in the middle to the end of January by seed and then transplant them out. It is considered in most areas, I think, a perennial, but I think it's mostly because it reseeds. You will have them come up around if you don't till your soil very much. Okay, anything on filler flowers we have a question of, or what I said?
Is the hybrid Queen's lace as evasive as the old varieties?
I don't think so. I don't really have a problem with evasiveness. Queen Anne's lace isn't evasive for me because I pick it all. That's, as a cut flower, I'm growing it for cutting, so I don't usually have a lot left. But I don't think the new variety, the hybrid varieties, wouldn't be near as evasive.
Okay.
And that's kind of the same way with any hybrid, isn't going to be as evasive as the old standard. Okay, I'm going to zoom through line flowers. And of course, this is easy to know what it is. These are flowers that are going to spike up and be above your bouquet. Amaranth. I grow some amaranth, but not much, just because it's so big. It doesn't go in my market bouquets. I'd have to have huge bouquets for it. But a lot of people like it. And a lot of the brides like the hanging varieties. Don't fertilize this at all, or it'll be so big you won't know what to do with it all. Loves warm weather, and just direct seed it. It is related to pigweed, so I've had it cross-pollinate with pigweed, which gives us an interesting look. But it's real easy to grow. Going to take the heat that we have here in Kansas. Baptisia, I would start with plants, but one plant will produce a lot of flowers for you. It has a taproot, so you're not going to move it once you plant it, but it has gorgeous, gorgeous line flowers, has no pest problems. And then also the leaves are excellent just as foliage in bouquets, because it really doesn't have pest flowers. It has sweet pea type flowers, so that's really nice. The purple ones are the old fashioned ones, and now they have new ones that are yellow and burgundy and all sorts of colors. It's a prairie flower to begin with, a prairie plant, so it likes dry soil. Buddleia, or butterfly bush, it's going to be a real good cut flower as a line. Here again, I would start, since it's a perennial, I would start with the plant, but it will last 7 to 10 days. It's a nice long lasting flower. Delphinium. Delphinium is a perennial, but here again, I grow it as an annual. I start the seeds usually in October, November, and plant them out in March. I do plant these in my high tunnel just because I don't want them to be out in the wind. If they're outside in the wind, they'll get to be about 2 feet tall. If I put them in the high tunnel, I can get them to be 4 or 5 feet tall. So I really like, and that's as an annual. And they're a short-lived perennial, so I just don't even try to keep them as a perennial, overwinter them. They do like cool roots, so the more you can get them to grow in cooler weather, the best. Gladiolas. Gladiolas are one of those things that it kind of, the popularity of gladiolas kind of fell by the wayside, but I found in the last 2 years, they've really come back. People are liking the old-fashioned flowers. You want to pick these when like one flower is maybe open. But you don't want them to open and then try and sell them, because those bottom flowers are going to be bad by the time you're going to use them. So we pick them right as the bottom flowers are showing a lot of color. They open very quickly. If you want to open them even quicker, what you'll want to do is take the gladiola and you place it in some deep warm water, and then pop off this little top up here. Just pop it off, and that will make the water just shoot right up there, and it will open up in a day rather than 3 to 5 days. So that's kind of a fun one, how to open those up quickly. Snapdragons. Oh, and back to the gladiolas. You can keep the bulbs from year to year. I have done that. I've actually left them in the ground, and sometimes they'll come back if we have a mild winter. But I tend to just use them as an annual. The bulbs on those aren't that expensive. Snapdragons, an annual that you can get started early. We start them inside the greenhouse in late January, early February. Transplant them out into March. They will take quite a bit of cold weather. We snip off the top so that they'll branch really good. You want to pick them when they are, a third open, but the flowers last 5 to 8 days without any problem. And of course, they can be held longer in cold temperature. In a cooler, I can keep snapdragons for about 3 weeks. And then if you cut after you're done with your flush of harvest, cut them down, and you can usually get a second harvest during the season. Larkspur, another one of the tall spiky flowers. It's a cousin of, it's the annual variety of delphinium. You can plant the seeds in September, October, November, get them started. They like to get their roots going, or you can just plant them out. You can plant them out now outside. I have found it's better to direct seed these rather than start with a plant. If you direct seed them, you'll get a much taller flower. If you start with a plant that you've started indoors, it's much shorter. You'll go from a 2-foot flower to, if you direct seed them, to a 4 or 5 foot flower. Harvest them when 30% of the flower stock is in bloom. They do need, put some floral food, some floral life in them. They'll last a lot longer for you. Liatris, Kansas gay flower, gay feather. I like this just for the spikes. And again, many people relate it to a wildflower look. We really liked it. It likes poor soil. I mean, it's one of those things. You can buy corms and plant those directly, or you can buy the plants from greenhouses. And they last forever, and they just multiply, and they do bloom from the top down. So you want to harvest them when the top is just starting to open. If it's too far, if it's bloomed more than halfway down, the top is going to start looking bad. And so you want to pick them as soon as they start showing any of the color. Millet is a great one. Here at the bottom is Purple Majesty, which is a nice, tall, dark, looks almost like cattails. And then the one on top is more of a hanging millet. And of course, the birds love them, but it's really nice for interest in bouquets. These are both started by seed anytime in the spring. You can direct seed the smaller hanging foxtail varieties. With the Purple Majesty, I tend to start it inside just because it's a bigger plant. It looks kind of like a corn plant. Stock. Here again, one of my favorites. I just couldn't do without stock, but I do grow it in a high tunnel. It needs protection, or it will be very short stemmed. I usually plant these the end of January and transplant them into the tunnel, probably probably the middle of March. Some varieties are single, but there are varieties that are more double than others, and I just grow those varieties. I grow varieties that are more whites. The whites and yellows are almost all double, where some of the pink and purple ones tend to be singles, and they're not near as pretty. We cut these when they're, maybe a third open. And then we just pull the whole plant because they won't give another cut. So we pull the whole plant and just cut the roots off. And in fact, I've gotten them when I've had to order them in for things. I will get them from the wholesale florist and it'll have roots on them yet. So you can even sell them with the roots on them. Tuberoses, an old-fashioned flower that we in the Midwest grow a lot of. Here again, it's one of those time-consuming plants because you have to dig them up every fall and you have to plant them every spring. So it's a tender bulb. It will not overwinter outside. It likes it hot, and it requires at least 75 degrees at night to initiate buds. So on years that we don't have a lot of tuberoses, it means that it's been a cooler summer, but it loves those really hot summers. Be sure to give it it takes a fair amount of nitrogen and water. So that you'll do best with that. The more water it has, the taller it'll be. But I've never had a problem with too short of tuberoses. Veronica. It's really gained a lot of popularity. I had a variety called Blue Charm that if I could find it again, I would love it. If anybody has ever seen Blue Charm, please let me know. I'm looking for plants or seeds. It was the tallest Veronica I've ever had, and I just loved it. Cut it early in the morning or late in the evening because it'll droop otherwise. And so here again, a hydrator might work for it. You want to pick them when they're first starting to bloom. You don't want them half open or they'll look tired at the bottom before they bloom at the top. So that's one of the great ones. Again, I would start with plants if you could. It's just a lot easier. And I'm not going to ask for questions now. I'm going to go on to greenery and just going to move through this real quick. You know, greenery is going to fill in all the spots that your filler flowers didn't, and it gives structure to your arrangement. Basil, I put in cinnamon basil, but about any type of basil will work. It's an excellent filler. People like it a lot because it's culinary, and they think, you know, can I eat this afterwards? They're so excited about it. It's very fast growing. You cut it and it's going to be back in 2 weeks and you can cut some more. Has a 7-day vase life if you do it right. I oftentimes will use a hydrator on this simply because it will wilt. Or I will pick it and just put it in a dark area with no wind, no breeze. And if I let it set for overnight, it'll last a lot longer. Also, don't put it in the cooler. It does not like cold temperatures. So if you put it where it's cold, it could cause the leaves to fall off, or it just doesn't look as good. Other good basil, Sweet Danny, which is a lemon basil, African blue. There's Johnny's has a really good, Johnny Seeds has a really good variety, different varieties of basil for cut flowers, and they actually even put it in there that it's a good cut flower, so you can get a lot of information from them. Bells of Ireland. This was one of those old-fashioned plants that I think will be coming back. It's a cool weather annual, so it's going to be planted the same time as your stock. So you're going to start it in late January, plant it out in mid to late March, harvest it in May. The spikes need to be stiff but not too dry. And then when harvesting it, you pull off all those leaves, the leaves that look like this. You pull those off and then you have just the bells on there. It does have little stickers on it, so that's kind of a problem. And what I have found, I think the biggest thing that's keeping Bells of Ireland from being popular, it has a disease. It's I wrote it even down here, Pseudospora. Anyway, it's a disease that has it'll cause little brown marks on the bells. And I've had a hard time finding seed that isn't already inoculated with this disease. So it's trying to find good seed on the Bells of Ireland that is the issue with those. And I think that's what's caused it to not be as popular as it used to be, because of this disease that causes the little brown spots. Here again, it's just in the spring. You're not going to have it later in the season. For Plurum, you can do multiple seedings on, and it's just a real airy, yellowy green foliage. Adapts well to many environments. It will reseed for you. Pick in the hydrator. It will do better, or again, just pick it and let it set overnight. That would help. But it's a wonderful early season. It's not going to go into July much, but it's a wonderful flower for filler and nice and airy. Dill and fennel. Now, some people don't like the smell of fennel, so but fennel flowers hold up really, really well. You don't have to put any hydrator in them. The dill, sometimes you have to keep them overnight before they get stiff enough. You can replant these throughout the season to keep them flowering. You can have dill and fennel from June. You have to plant it pretty early, get it in June, but it'll go clear till frost. Harvest when the pollen is just starting to show, but isn't too much on there. But again, herbs, people love herbs in their bouquets. So that's a nice one to put in, and it's fragrant. The dill might be a little more acceptable fragrance than the fennel, but many people don't stick their noses in there. You know, the fennel isn't offensive from, 3 or 4 feet. I put eucalyptus in here because I've always grown eucalyptus. I grow it as an annual. And it's a lovely gray filler that we get from mid to late summer. Likes well-drained soil. You could put it in a bouquet this week, let it sit on the table for 2 weeks, take it out, put it in another bouquet. It's going to last a long, long time. But we only get one cutting off of eucalyptus. Biggest problem with eucalyptus right now is there's little, if any, seed available. We would start this normally, September, October, November, then plant it out in April and start harvesting in July. But that with all the wildflowers that were in Australia, that's the excuse I've been given. Wildfire. Not wildflowers. With the wildfires in Australia a few years ago, they're having a real hard time getting enough seed. And I haven't been able to find plugs. So if any of you know of any eucalyptus seed or plugs, please let me know. We didn't get any last year, and I tried early this year, and all I got were laughs from the seed dealers. So it's when we can get it, it's a wonderful thing to grow, and you'll get eucalyptus 3 to 4 feet tall and branching stems. So it's a nice thing to put in. And then, of course, grasses of all kinds. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on grasses because there's so many of them. That's a whole nother topic. But a lot of them you'll want to harvest and then let them poof out, kind of like the ones here at the top, the maiden grass. Other flowers you want to use straight out of the field before they dry. Explosion grass is one of our favorites, and you can plant this, you can direct seed it, or you can start with plugs either way, but I'd probably direct seed it because grasses are pretty easy to grow. It's an annual grass. You can plant it throughout the season in succession so that you can have it year round, but it really fills a bouquet nice and gives movement to any bouquet. And this is one of those, I just put this in here to remind people, you don't have to have a lot of flowers in a bouquet. This is mostly just greenery with a few flowers that has made a gorgeous bouquet. Back to it, this isn't greenery, but it's whitery, I guess. Lambsir and Dusty Miller make great filler as greenery. I would probably suggest Dusty Miller over Lambsir. The Lambsir if you use the flower stems, they're a little stiffer, but the leaves themselves are pretty soft, and I've used them in bouquets or boutonnieres and corsages where I dry them a little bit before I use them. Dusty Miller, however, it will hold up as long as it's late in the season. If it's early in the season, it's a little soft and it won't hold up well. We have some in a high tunnel that's been growing for about 3 years, and we just keep it's paid for itself many times over. Well worth putting in someplace where you can protect it if you can. Otherwise, it is an annual, and it would die during most winters. There's a bouquet with the Dusty Miller in it. And this is stock up here in the upper left, Dusty Miller through here, Dahlias, and some roses. And then this is seeded eucalyptus, which we cannot grow here. Those are trees in California. Talking about greenery, ornamental kale. A lot of times we're so tired of planting, mid-season that we forget about growing into the fall. And so ornamental kales and cabbages are wonderful for fall. Scented geraniums, I keep mother plants growing throughout the year. And this is what the Victorians used to cover body odor. And I mean, they would carry a little leaf of scented geraniums with them. And you want to pick these early in the morning. And I smash all I have my plants in pots. And I put the pots really close together so that they're really growing straight up and down because I don't want them flopping around. But if you pick them in the early morning, they'll last weeks. And actually they'll even root for you if you want to that way. But it's a wonderful greenery to put in and gives fragrance, one of the few very fragrant greenery. And then shiso is kind of something that people are starting to use a lot of. It's a lot like basil. It's an herb that they use when making sushi. Yeah, they use them for wraps for sushi. And the variety called Britain, it has green leaves and underneath is red leaves. So you get both in the same one. And it needs to be fairly mature when you harvest it and let it set at least overnight to take up the water. And again, don't put it treat it like you do basil. Don't put it into the cooler. It doesn't like cold, but it's a wonderful filler that is unique and people are always looking for unique. This is easily started from seed. Succulents, they became really big a few years ago. And the nice thing about succulents is you can put them in a bouquet and then they can take them home and put them on some dirt and they'll root and they can keep those plants forever and ever. So it's a nice thing for weddings. A lot of people like to have succulents that they can keep. We just stick a wire down through them and stick them into the bouquet. They don't need anything else. They don't need any water. So that's pretty nice. I just put this in real quick. This is woodies for greenery. This is a whole nother topic if we wanted to get into woodies, but in our area, bittersweet is available. Beautyberry, boxwood we use year round. Curly willow we use year round. Forsythia in the spring. Honeysuckle. Flowering fruit trees, of course, the branches in the spring, you can force those. Nine bark has become a real popular. It has that dark leaf. Spireas, viburnums, Weigelia, maple, gum. You can use about anything for greenery, and the woodies area is kind of an area that's unto itself. There's more than I can even talk about, but look beyond just your flower garden for things to go into your bouquet. And here's a bouquet that there it has the succulents, it has cabbages, it has eucalyptus, there's nigella we didn't talk about, boxwood, but it's mostly just green things. Oh, these are peppers. These are the black pearl peppers. Oh, and this is sedum down here. So those are all things that are not really considered flowers, but always think of them about anything that grows horticulturally that can be a flower. So I know I'm running a little long, so I just wanted to finish up with enjoy fresh flowers every day. So is there any questions?
Yes, we do have one, and we'll probably have more. What are some of the best cut flowers for fragrance? Some seem to lose their fragrance quickly or turn to a bad smell in a couple of days.
Peonies have a wonderful fragrance, but then there are varieties of even peonies that are horrible. The more pollen that there is in the peony, the worse they smell. I have one that it's called Peter Brand, and it is the most gorgeous burgundy peony, but it has lots of yellow pollen in the middle of it, and you smell it and it's rancid. It's just horrible. So yeah, once the pollen comes on, sometimes it'll go bad and give a bad smell. Or if you haven't changed the water, that will also cause bad smells. Scented geraniums are are always going to give you good fragrance. Dianthus and carnations, which are the same family, those are good fragrant flowers. Of course, lavender, and I didn't mention lavender because most of the lavender we grow is so short, I don't really use much of it for bouquets. Lilies can be very fragrant. Some are, some aren't. Of course, if you're growing roses, a lot of your garden roses are going to be super fragrant. Oh, tuberoses. Yeah. In fact, John, when we're picking tuberoses, sometimes if we're delivering a lot of tuberoses to a florist, John will take an aspirin before he gets in the car because the fragrance is so strong that gives him a headache. But
Okay, a few more comments. I have pink ones, I think referring to peonies, and my neighbor a deep color but smelled horrible. Someone else says, so much good information. I enjoyed your presentation. Thank you.
thank you.
Okay, what can I seed start indoors now?
Right now, you're going to be wanting to think about stock. You could still do delphinium. You could do larkspur if you wanted to. What else? Status would do really well now. You have until the end of the month. Anything you start now isn't going to be, you could start it at the end of the month and you're going to be just as good, just because the day lengths are so short right now. And you don't want to get things started too early sometimes, because then they get big and leggy. And so I'm for most flowers, you're going to start the end of January rather than more towards the beginning. But you could still do delphinium, larkspur. You could do baplurum, Queen Anne's lace, anything that you could put out in the fall, you could do now. But like stock, dianthus, feverfew, you could start rudbeckias right now, the annual rudbeckias. But those you can still start them the end of the month and you're in great shape. Yeah, and there a lot of when you start depends on how you're starting them. If you're starting under lights in a basement, that's going to be completely different than if you're starting them in a greenhouse. Lights in a basement, you're going to get things really leggy. And I really discourage people from starting too early under lights, because leggy is not good. You'd rather have a sturdier plant and get it out a little bit later than to have a big leggy plant. I always feel bad for people. They get all excited and they want to plant their tomatoes 1st of February, and ugh. That's going to be a hard one to transplant.